saying we were going to do 8 and 9, but I just think there's enough in chapter 8 to, I don't know, I think it works on its own. Yeah, it was fun. Let me pull up the questions real quick. I forgot to turn them off, but I'll just pull them up on my phone.
There you go. Here's your saw.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go. So, overall, let's just do, let's start with overall impressions of chapter 8. Specifically it was the sacrifice of, or the sacrifice with Abraham and Isaac, not of Isaac. And then the Paschal lamb. And I think the thing that I mean, especially in the Paschal lamb section, gosh, it was just Eucharistic overtone after Eucharistic overtone. When you hear it explained, it was just, it was pretty incredible. Other thoughts, anything?
It was really interesting when you got to the end of the chapter. I don't know if we're going to expand on this even more, but the intellectual ingestion of Christ. I was like,
It was like head explode. Yeah.
there was a lot.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
Intellectual what?
The intellectual ingestion of Christ.
So I thought you said.
Yeah.
Did you not read the chapter?
Excuse me?
Father?
Pardon?
Did you not read
That was a little noisy.
chapter 8?
I taught down, John.
Okay.
So,
I do have a question.
Yeah.
In the Paschal lamb section. I guess at the risk of, he says later about the bones of not breaking the bones and not eating them because it's sort of symbol of not being able to ingest every spiritual.
Oh yeah.
So I guess maybe this might fall under that, but on 157, he kind of talks about sort of like, I guess, he kind of talks about, Christ having to become incarnate and sort of experience or go through the human condition in order to gain this sort of experience. So I guess just for clarity, is that, because our understanding is, God is immutable, he's unchangeable, right? But it sort of sounds like there's a change that's occurring, and it's something that he doesn't have that he now has.
yeah.
Does this sort of fall under the essence versus energies kind of thing? Where this is, we're talking about a change in God as man and not in divinity.
I would say the fullness of humanity being expressed there.
Because he would have knowledge of the human experience without, like, if so from an omniscience, omnipotent standpoint, he would have this knowledge and not necessarily need to experience
Yeah, and
something temporal.
And I think there was specific language, and I remember, I'm looking at it now, because I remember being a little puzzled with the language. And yet, I mean, he's quoting the Apostle Paul, or the writer of Hebrews, which our church says Apostle Paul. Though he was the Son, he learned obedience through the things he suffered, and being made perfect, he became a cause of eternal salvation. And so again, he's saying, I mean, he's asking a question, how in Scripture say he learned obedience. And so, I mean, perhaps you're on to something. I mean, we don't say he changed, in some sense. I mean, even the crucifixion, like Christ is identified by John the theologian as the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So what I am kind of taking it is, as is, that which is not assumed is not healed. That which Christ has not assumed, correct me if I'm wrong, that's Athanasius, right?
After this, well,
Um,
Oh, no, that might be,
Cyril.
well, it's one of those wonderful 4th century saints that all somehow lived at the same time. It might be Gregory the theologian. But anyway, all that to say is in saying he learned, I mean, I think Father is specifically using that because he's quoting the Apostle Paul, first of all. And so when he's saying he learned the experience of obedience, the lure of temptation, the difficult struggle to resist it, and by persevering in righteousness through all of that, he suffered and he endured it perfectly, accumulating experiential knowledge of maintaining perfect faithfulness to God in the face of adversity, an experience no other human has attained. And so he's I think the point he's making is that Christ assumed everything that it is to be human.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's made like the word learn seems a bit misplaced in that because
Right.
learn sort of implies that there is a like something there's something lacking and there is something changed, but I think in my it would be in my mind more appropriate that it would should be like practiced maybe
Or experience.
experience.
Yeah.
well, but it says learn.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing, is that our inclination is to, I've got to think about this, because I don't want to be espousing anything terribly controversial or, God forbid, heretical. But I feel like our inclination is to say, no, Christ was fully God and fully man. But in the back of our mind, we're like, yeah, but he was mostly just fully God. And so, like, Christ learned things. He learned to walk. He learned to read. He learned obedience. I mean, like, it specifically says that he learned it. And in learning it, he practiced it perfectly. So I think it's because I agree with you. I was uncomfortable with language, and I'm sitting here thinking, what could he possibly learn? But I think we have to be careful in even thinking that way to some extent. Because in doing so, we could be in danger of neglecting his humanity.
And it was great, St. Gregory, the theologian. That was
So my second guess was right. Option B.
first guess.
Okay. All right, let's look at some of these discussion questions. In Genesis 22, how are Abraham and Isaac like God the Father and Jesus Christ respectively, and how are they different?
So one thing, the biggest thing is that Isaac didn't die.
Yeah, I think that's right toward the end of that section, and I think that's the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, that's the problem.
God, is it that God in his mercy, withheld that, and we were like, do it.
Yeah,
I liked the parallel, because I hadn't thought about it before, of Isaac carrying the wood for the offering
Yes.
and Christ carrying the cross. That really hit me. I was like, whoa, I hadn't thought about that. Because you could see the parallels, Father, Son, involving sacrifice and obedience, but I had never drawn that deep.
Yeah.
The sacrifice is being willing.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, the willing sacrifice, and then again, the one that hit me hard, it was kind of similar, but ultimately, Christ died, Isaac didn't, but in neither case did the Father kill the Son. He makes the point, God did not kill Jesus, humanity did. And that one was kind of like that was a light bulb moment.
I also like the fact that Christ's sacrifice renewed our commitment to obedience.
Wow.
Yes,
That, I had to read that sentence a couple of times.
anything?
Then it also talked about the love of the Father for the Son, right?
Yeah.
During both
Yeah, yeah.
of that similarity.
How, and actually Walter already kind of alluded to this, but this is the whole chapter. How has this chapter helped you better understand God the Father's role in Christ's sacrifice? I think particularly I think the story of Abraham and Isaac, again, for me, and this is spitballing a little bit, but I feel like that one helps understanding the Father's role. And then the section on the Paschal Lamb is a little bit more Christocentric. I don't know, that was my thought. Anything else?
I thought it was interesting that he noted that, like, God, even as the Father, still had those paternal feelings, that he wasn't above the sacrifice, or that, I mean, at least like on Abraham's side, like, he had to believe that his son would be okay, or there would be some sort of reconciliation there so that he could be the father of nations, but, God also had, like, that conflict of, like, this is my beloved son. It's not just that he's God and he saw everything and was like, all right, this is an easy decision, we need to do this, but like, that he had that struggle too, as like a father would for his son.
And that's really interesting too, because when I read that, I was kind of, I was under the impression
Yeah,
that,
yeah, turn down the, audio on
I'll
the.
just close it, yeah.
Turn it down.
Or just,
I was sitting here wondering, I'm like,
So was that,
I've never heard that echo in this building. And then I'm like,
when people go in there and then there's two speakers in there, they don't close the door.
yeah.
And
gotcha.
they have it cranked up.
Yeah.
But basically, after reading about Abraham and Isaac, like I was under the impression that like Abraham wasn't thinking that Isaac was going to come out of this okay. I was thinking that Abraham was just, he was like, okay, I'm gonna sacrifice my son. That's how it's gonna turn out.
Yeah.
I didn't. So reading this, I didn't think that Abraham was thinking that Isaac will come out of this still alive.
Yeah, I actually, that's true too. I always had the same thought, feeling. That I had this idea that when Abraham told Isaac, well, God will provide, that it was sort of a wink and a nod, like, don't worry about it, son. You're on the menu, basically. And like, it never actually occurred to me that it would be otherwise. But I mean, I if I could find the section, I'd quote it, but I want to say, I mean, he pretty well demonstrated that that's actually that wasn't a common thought in early commentaries, I think.
Right. He cited the fact that Abraham told the servant, sit here and wait.
Yes.
We're gonna go and we'll come back.
Yes.
And he used that as an example of the fact that Abraham, although he was being obedient, he also trusted that God was gonna do something.
Yeah.
And then he pointed out all of the other references to anti-human sacrifice in scripture.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the other thing.
Where's the verse that says, and Abraham even believed that he would raise him from the dead? Isn't that in the
Right.
New Testament? Where's
Hebrews
that?
11:19.
It's in Hebrews.
Hebrews, thank you.
Page 144.
The whole thing. No, you're supposed to stop that. Not
I
even.
know. What else do you want to know, Joe?
Thank you. I have one interesting thing,
Yeah.
is that I'm gonna start with saying one of my word things, that it's almost like a chessboard, but the pieces keep on changing. Like with Abraham and Isaac, like what we said, the son wasn't killed. But then when we talk about with Moses and making the cross on the door, they were protected, and then the angel of death passed by and killed the Egyptians. So there's all this symbolism, but each time some piece is doing something different.
Yeah. And to some extent, I mean, each piece is doing something different. I mean, and I hear you, like the
That's the best way I can
but
explain
we've
it.
got, no, I agree with you, I do, but I think you still, I think thematically, we're seeing some of the same
That's the
themes.
word I was thinking about. It's variations on a theme. It's like,
Well, there,
Yeah.
there it
it's
is.
your music thing.
I-
You
that
hear
was
the
perfect.
same- It's the same, even embedded deep into a whole other thing. It's like, well, here comes that theme again.
Yeah.
And it resonates and it evokes.
I like
That is the perfect way to explain it to John.
Yes.
Like, put it in
Okay.
musical terms,
Right.
like that's,
As soon as you
There
say
you
it.
go.
I
I like that.
yeah, no, you said variation on theme, and he just sits back. He's like, yep, that makes sense now. Okay, how might this chapter's explanation of the Old Testament Pascha, Passover, help us better understand and appreciate our Christian celebration of Pascha?
I have trouble with this part of it. Did anyone else have trouble? Like, everything seemed like a bit of a stretch. Like, not saying it's not true, but like all these connections that we made, and this
When,
bowl.
like about the boil, like they
This
couldn't
and
boil,
this.
they couldn't do that, like some of those types of
And if
things.
you
Yeah.
roast it, then that makes it this, and it makes it delicious. And
I know.
therefore, and it just kept going, and I don't know, that's the one section of the book where I really wasn't like.
Trying to-
with it.
There were instances in the book, yeah, or in this chapter where it felt like, you're back in English class, and you're trying to find like symbols and just like every
Yeah.
sentence.
So-
and you're like, okay, but some of them made a lot of sense, and sort of like he does bring it home, I think, but.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it does sound far-fetched, but if you read enough patristic commentary, nothing is meaningless. Like, it is all ascribed meaning. They take this idea of the Old Testament being a shadow, and almost everything is ascribed some meaning. And yeah.
This
and
may
it's-
display some of my own weakness, but I'm sympathetic with that, cause there were.
Oh,
times
yeah.
Where I'm like, I agree that it's some,
Oh, yeah,
sex showing,
yeah.
but that doesn't mean that every tiny thing, does that necessarily mean that every tiny thing happens?
Yeah, I remember,
So.
I mean, in college, like, I remember, I was in that's too long a story, I'll tell you later. But like, I was given a really bad grade for doing that with like a short story, like, it's like, oh, here's what this obviously means. And it was like, no. And so, yeah, I completely, see the point you're making, and I'm inclined to read it and kind of be like, oh my gosh, this seems a little far-fetched, but like, a lot of patristic commentators are very, very, very detailed, and they are explaining every little thing. Now, that's not to say everything they say is right, I mean, like, patristic commentators are infallible. But, there are some broad areas of consensus.
The one part of it, when they mentioned the roasting, is how to do it would be on a cross type of thing, where I'm like, okay.
Well, I thought that was really interesting, and that was the other point too, is that he quoted two different patristic commentators who said two different things, and he more or less said, like, they don't necessarily negate each other. I forget how he kind of put it, but it was just sort of, that they work together, but they really are looking at the scripture, the Old Testament scriptures in particular, metaphorically. And that's not to say that they're saying, well, these didn't happen, that these are just, that this didn't happen. But that's something I think we in the modern era tend to be somewhat dismissive of. But that was a very, turkey's done. But that was actually a very common way of reading any sacred text, was metaphorically. And so you've got the meaning on the surface, but there's always a deeper meaning. That was a foundational belief up until probably about the 16th, 17th century in almost any religious or sacred text. So, how does the section on Pascha help us understand our celebration of Pascha? Or does it?
Well, everybody else is stealing my comments.
We stole them.
What'd you say?
Stole his thunder.
Everyone else stole his comment.
Everybody stole your thunder?
Comments.
So,
So you mentioned a couple times, talk about Sajja, like the idea of like nourishment.
yeah,
And I was kind of like, okay, because I mean, we think about it, we normally think about it with Christ, but the idea of like how, right before they
Yeah.
left, is like, take this because you're gonna need it for this arduous kind of journey, and it's like, you know, kind of just maybe good, like that's what this life is, essentially.
yeah. And even this idea of in the Passover celebration, yeah, they're dressed for a journey. It's like they're sojourners. They're not tied to the place. They're moving along.
Yeah.
I didn't highlight. I marked this paragraph, but I mean, I think it answers the question really well, and it's worth reading.
The 154?
156 actually.
Nice try. You have to read that one too.
As our paschal lamb, Christ not only marks us with his blood, but also feeds us with his flesh. On one hand, he nourishes our intellect with his teaching and example, that is, with the knowledge he revealed through his incarnation. This intellectual nourishment goes hand in hand with the sacramental nourishment he provides through Holy Communion. As we feast on his body and blood in the form of consecrated bread and wine, just as the paschal lamb nourished the Israelites for their upcoming journey, so Christ strengthens us through this intellectual and sacramental partaking, preparing us for our spiritual journey to the promised land of eternal communion with God. And I mean, okay, I guess that doesn't actually answer the question, having read it all, but I still thought it was good.
I had a bunch of that highlighted too, but then on 154 at the top, I like the blood on the houses, Christ's blood now marks those who belong to him.
Yeah.
This is like,
Yeah, I've got that one underlined too.
Read again.
like the blood on the houses, Christ's blood now marks those who belong to him. It's like a badge and then kind of,
You say we have a badge?
We don't need to.
I think that's sort of why we wear like baptismal crosses. Sort of a sort of mark.
And in some respect. I think, when they're talking about the fire and how the lamb is cooked, and Cyril says the roasted suggests the perfection of Emmanuel, as it were, through sufferings, for it was necessary, it says, that the pioneer of our salvation be perfected through sufferings. And they're contrasting it like, well, it can't be raw, and it's not gonna be boiled and mushy like a lamb stew. It's like it's roasted and at least the emphasis on taste. Like my one takeaway is that this is the argument for using good bread and good wine. I have been, I mean, at places with bad bread and bad wine, it is no less the body and blood of Christ. And yet, it doesn't quite capture maybe, I don't know.
There's no.
God forgive me if I'm saying something wrong, but there's not the richness of the experience there, with Manischewitz. And
That's what you have to separate the noise from the signal there. It's like,
yeah.
So, is there any way, that we can relate to the intellectual ingestion of Christ to this, or is that something generally of a different topic?
Is it anything like muse? Is that what, like, cause the intellectual is always, we always hear about, no, it's not intellectual, it's.
Right.
Reviewing.
Let me see if I can find that.
It's toward the end of the
One,
chapter.
I think it's this.
So,
Yeah, the Holy Spirit is like, see, yeah, there you go. Okay, the intellectual ingestion of Christ, seeking not just to understand him, but also to become like him as a result of this knowledge, goes hand in hand with physical sacramental ingestion of his body and blood in Holy Communion. For Cyril, learning and adopting the ways of Christ must accompany with reception of communion in order for the latter to be meaningful. By saying that the head must be eaten and the feet and the innards would simply suggest that he who has become a partaker of Christ, by being given a share of his holy flesh and blood, needs to have Christ's mind and to love to traverse the way of interior good works, perceiving quite clearly what is in Christ. And so, I mean, I think what Cyril's saying, and the point that's being made, is like, when we say, I mean, from a just sacramental standpoint, you know, from receiving the body and blood of Christ, what we're receiving is whole. I mean, again, we're an interesting culture. I mean, like, we're most, up until probably 60, 70 years ago, like, most animals were used snout to tail, you know? I mean, and it's not quite, I don't think it's that way anymore very much. I mean, especially in you know, we like the muscle meat, when we eat meat. But
The rest goes into dog food.
the rest goes into dog food or,
And
yeah.
hot dogs.
Hot dogs.
Or Mexican, the tacos.
I mean, I'm gonna tell you, like,
sausages.
yeah, I actually like Braunschweiger, like things with liver in it, but not as the main ingredient. It's pretty good. Anyway, neither here nor there.
What's the name?
Braunschweiger, it's like a German, kind of like bologna. It's a sausage, but it's
Not to be confused with
Somewhere like-
finger.
mixed between a sausage and a pate almost. It's soft. Oh yeah, you're revealing your Pennsylvania roots. Yeah,
What was that?
Good stuff.
Scrapple.
It's a board game, right?
So, but again, like this idea that they talk about, like, you're eating the head, the brains, all of that kind of stuff. Like, I think it's painting a portrait when we think Eucharistically of when we are receiving the body and blood of Christ, we are receiving the whole of Christ. If that.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I think this bears repeating, it's been brought up, what does it mean to be marked with the blood of Christ? We covered that. Anything else need to be said about that? I mean, he quoted Cyril a couple times, and basically, I just have this section marked, blood of Christ blocks the destructive demon, frustrating his attempt to bring death-dealing sin into our souls through our senses, just as the blood of the Lamb blocked the destroyer from entering the Israelites' homes. And so I thought that was like what does, Christ's blood marks those who belong to him. We covered that, so what's the effect? It blocks destruction,
Yeah, I mean, he also adds though, which I think was more surprising to me, or something, was that it also attracts the benevolent attention of God the Father, so like, it's sort of a, dual purpose with that, I think in my mind, the blocking of the evil, evil sort of, that to me was more well understood, but then kind of the, wow, this also attracts the benevolent side as well.
Right, and again, that was an interesting point too, because it was like, it attracts the benevolent intention of God the Father, but whereas rejection of Christ antagonizes God, leading to destruction like the Egyptians. I mean, again, I'm not sure that that's God sitting up there, I don't know. I don't think the point being made is that he's Zeus, aiming his lightning bolts. But there is, even God leaving people to their own devices, withdrawing his benevolence, it's destructive.
Well, I think that's what got you, what you said was correct, because I was thinking the lines to where they put the blood on the doorpost and the angel of death passed over. So, and I remember watching, the Ben-Hur, not Ben-Hur, but
Ten Commandments.
Ten Commandments. And you remember that they found the blood on the guy who didn't really put it there? Somebody else put the blood there and says, oh, you're part of them. And so it was kind of like they actually brought it onto themselves. If they did not put blood on the doorposts, then they would reap the consequences of the angel of death. So it's not really God doing something, it's them not doing it.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, the angel of death,
Had a duty to do, he did something. But he would only do it once you didn't do something.
yeah, and again, it's just, ultimately, it's up to you. That mark is there for the taking, essentially. And God's benevolence is a manifest to those who have the mark and not to those who don't.
I did like how it said though, because if you start to think, oh great, I've got the mark, I'm good. But it said something like those who take communion.
I was thinking the same thing, yeah, that was good.
Take the communion with something and zeal, like he qualified it. It wasn't just like if you take communion, that you
Yeah.
protect the person.
Okay, and then the last question is, and again, we've touched on this, but what did you learn from this chapter that helps you to better understand Holy Communion?
We should be going up there with a lot more reverence than we do, at least I should.
Yeah, again, I don't wanna belabor a point with this whole idea that, taking on Christ is taking on Christ's totality, or taking in Christ is taking in the whole of Christ, body and mind.
Yeah, on the food aspect of it, it's, he says that with, the lamb being, the Israelites' nourishment for this long, journey ahead to, spiritual, to salvation, so that there's that parallel with communion, and that this is, it's periodic, nourishment, for ourselves on our spiritual journey.
The friendship factor has become more important.
Mm.
So, because Christ calls us friends, which I've never heard a good explanation of that. And so this whole thing on sacrifice was to work on the relationship of friendship with God. And that whole Southern pie thing, he made a lot of sense. I was like, oh, I get that, because
Yeah.
I have friends, but the idea that you bake something, you take it over to the new neighbors, the expectation is that if there's gonna be a friendship, they're gonna give it back. And so that aspect of the sacrifice that was for humanity, that was for God, but was also for us. And just the reciprocal aspect of that friendship that I don't think I actually understand yet.
Yeah, but I mean, I will say, I like that you bring that up, because, I mean, that is it's an odd statement in how we often think about our faith, you know, Christ calling us friends, or, you know, all that kind of stuff. In terms of sacrifice, I mean, what a lot of the early chapters of this book is that sacrifice itself is a friendship device. I mean, it brings about, you know, friendship, closeness, relationship. And as we kind of work our way through this book, like that those elements of become more clear, I think.
Like that pie thing, couldn't that be like, you know, like Abraham offers up Isaac, it's only like here, and then God like waits a month.
Yeah.
There's a time, and then he's like, here.
And God offers him back,
Right, right.
and you know, I mean, yeah, that's actually, that's, I mean, again, like just this, yeah, that's an interesting parallel, I have to think through that a little bit, but I mean, I think it's right. You know, but this idea, it's like, here's the gift, and God's saying, here's the gift, you're a father of many nations.
Here's your pie.
Yeah, seriously.
I'm hungry.
Interesting, that's really great. So, anything else? Eli, you sure?
What did you like about this chapter, Eli? You didn't
Yeah,
like
like
anything?
father.
He did. He also liked the fact, now he knows it's being recorded.
So he said,
So he can watch these discussions several times, right? Alright,
Maybe.
alright, let's pray. This truly means bless thee, that tokens of the blessing of this pure and mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond comparison to seraphim. Thou who without corruption givest birth to God, the Lord, truth and tokens, we magnify thee. Amen.
Amen.
What do we do next week?
I feel like we should just do chapter 9.
No, okay.
Yeah, it's a lot, we should bite off. Hopefully, are you gonna read me some essays?